Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. Chapter 299, The Reality of Mizuru's Zanpakuto the Okayan. It was not the first time Grimjow had heard this term. As one of the Espadas, he also knew at least a part about Aizen's purpose. The reason for the decisive battle between Aizen and the Soul Society was that he wanted to use the Karakura town of the world of living, which was a Jiroki, concentrated spirit zone, to create the Okayan. Although he doesn't know what the Okayan is, it could be seen that this thing was something important from the fact that Aizen wanted to create this thing, and the Shinigami were fighting him to stop him from obtaining it. As for Sojiro, he had never heard of Okayan before. After all, he had never even heard of Zero Division, so it would naturally be difficult for him to know about Okayan. However, according to Mizuru's statement, creating the Okayan seemed to require a lot of souls. Sojiro didn't know that creating the Okayan not only needed souls, but also a Jiroki. There were conditions that needed to be met in order to create the Okayan. 100,000 souls and a Jiroki with a radius of 1 spiritual rit, usually about 1/3 of an English mile, and now has a standardized length of a half kilometer, 500 meters or 1,640 feet or 0.311 miles. The so-called Jiroki refers to the point in the human world that possesses the greatest concentration of spiritual beings. That place would move with the times, and Karakura Town, which was referred to as District 3600 by the Shinigami, was situated on the current Jiroki. This was why the Soul Society determined Karakura Town as the location of the decisive battle and moved it after confirming Aizen's purpose. But as fate would have it, the decisive battle between Aizen and the Soul Society was not over yet, but Mizuru sneaked into the Soul Society, and was about to create the Okayan, which Aizen dreamed of. Of course, Mizuru was not sure whether Okayan could be created by his method, but right now the real Karakura Town was in Soul Society. If there was a chance, it was now, and Mizuru was ready to try. Of course, for the first condition for creating Okayan, 100,000 souls, he does not intend to use the souls of human beings of the world of living. Even if some human beings with spiritual power were occasionally born in the Jiroki, and they come to the Soul Society after death, at most they only have the possibility of becoming a Shinigami. Among the 100,000 souls, most of them were ordinary human souls. For such ordinary soul, even if there were 100,000 of them, in terms of quality, it was not even as good as a noble born with high amounts of spiritual pressure. After all, they were nobles. As one of the founders of the 3 realms, there were still some distinctive powers left in his blood. This was also the reason why there could be born Shinigami among them from generation to generation, and they could live in Siriite AI all the time, instead of staying outside Siriite AI like ordinary souls who couldn't bear the concentration of Rishi in the air, and their lifespan gets greatly damaged, and then they eventually die a premature death. Byakuya's wife, Hisuna, died because she could not bear the strong Rishi in the air of Siriite AI. The blood-red barrier instantly spread, centered on Mizuru, and then covered most of the Noble Street. In Noble Street, some nobles who were having fun in their mansions soon discovered that the world had undergone some changes and turned crimson. This strange change immediately attracted the attention of many nobles. Not long after that, they discovered that an old man in one of the clans had died strangely, which immediately caused panic among many nobles. With the blood mist, the first nobleman died, and soon, more nobles died one after another. Although they were all nobles, the person who was manipulating the Bankai was Mizuru after all. Even if the nobles were sentenced to death, he still had tendencies to spare some. For example, some nobles he was familiar with, such Shunsi, Jashiro, and the families of Byakuya, Yaruichi and others, he did not make much moves on them. Most of his targets were noble clans that had committed certain crimes by relying on its noble status. As for how to determine that the family committed a crime? Quite simply, he got it all from Central 46. The souls of the previous batch of Central 46 people had been imprisoned by him in the Sea of Blood for a long time. Sometimes when there was nothing to do, Mizuru liked to pull their souls out for a trial. After all, Central 46 had always liked to judge others, convict them, and frame them, So even if it's just their imprisoned souls that Mizuru was judging, the feeling was really different. And so whether a certain noble committed a crime, and whether they had covered up for that noble, he couldn't be clearer. As for the souls of this batch of Central 46, although they were also in his hands, after all, this batch had only been in office for a short time, and they haven't even enjoyed the power of Central 46, so Mizuru didn't bother to interrogate them. The information extracted from the souls of the previous batch of Central 46 members earlier made Mizuru sneer at the group of nobles. It was too much to write down, and it would not be an exaggeration to say that the crimes they committed abusing their powers were endless. Central 46's protection of the nobles was not as simple as preventing Yamamoto from investigating the Kasumioji family and allowing Tokunada, who killed his wife, to go scot-free. Almost any matter involving the nobles, they would either turn it into a big deal or turn into a trivial matter depending on their interests. It was also after knowing what they were doing that Mizuru couldn't help but think of Kachiki Koga. This guy was downright unlucky. Obviously, he could be released without any incidents back then after being locked up in the Repentance Palace for a few days. After all, the status of the Kachiki family was there, but because he couldn't bear the anger in his heart, he decided to escape prison on his own initiative, and then for the glory of the nobles, Jinrai had to deal with Koga himself. So in the final analysis, Koga didn't know how powerful his father-in-law was, and misjudged the strength of the Kachiki family. In the crimson barrier that enveloped most of the noble street, all the nobles who committed crimes died one after another. It was not an action against individuals, but rather against their whole families. Although there might be some people among them who never needed to abuse power, but they still enjoyed the status brought by the abused power. So they were also tied with their families and naturally had to pay for it. One after another, souls gathered towards Mizuru, and Sojiro and Grimjow also noticed this phenomenon. Grimjow was a little surprised. It was the first time he saw Mizuru's bunkai. Sojiro, on the other hand, looked terrified. Mizuru had never shown such a strange ability in the battle in Las Noches before. There is still more to his Zanpakuto's abilities than previously shown? In your opinion, what is the essence of a Shinigami's power? Mizuru glanced at Sojiro with a look as if knowing what he was thinking, and asked an inexplicable question. Sojiro was stumped with the question and remained silent. Mizuru asked himself and answered. It's the soul. My Zanpakuto utilizes that same very power. Mizuru's sword was actually a Zanpakuto with the soul system in its essence. Chapter 300, Soul. The so-called space transference, the so-called immortality, and even his devouring ability were actually the supplementary abilities after Mizuru releases his bunkai. The real ability of his Zanpakuto was actually the power to invade the mysterious realm of the souls. Sojiro didn't understand what Mizuru meant by the sentence that the most important thing in Shinigami was the soul. Wasn't that a matter of course? But this was not as simple as sounded. Mizuru's personal experience over the years had made him reach this answer from another perspective. Shinigami, except for some nobles who have lived in a soul society for generations, most of them were actually former human beings, who died in the world of living, and some of them had souls with spiritual power who then achieved the profession of Shinigami through systematic training. Like humans in the world of living, Shinigami have bodies that bleed when injured. But in fact, this body, blood, all were just appearances, and what was really important was the main soul. The so-called body was nothing more than an aggregate of rishi, which protect the inner soul and endow the Shinigami with an extremely long lifespan. Of course, there was a price, that is, the souls with spiritual power compared to ordinary souls, would have a sense of hunger. On the contrary, those souls that do not have spiritual power and do not have spirit particles to aggregate their bodies, they do not know hunger, and their lifespan was not as long as that of souls with spiritual power. If such people live in an environment with slightly richer spirits, one would die due to various discomforts. So although it seemed that they were all souls, there was a huge difference in their soul's quality and characteristics, and so a soul with spiritual power and a soul without spiritual power were actually two completely different existences. The most basic difference is, the Shinigami have the Seiketsu, binding chain, on them, which was just as important as the chain of fate was on a soul. While there was no chain per se connected to a Shinigami, the area where the chain of fate was originally was still just as important as when the Shinigami was a simple soul. In a Shinigami, the Seiketsu acts as a boost to spiritual power, in conjunction with the Hikujui, soul sleep, the source of spiritual power. These 2 points were commonly considered pressure points. If they were pierced, they seal up this spiritual power, and the Shinigami would lose all their power. The Shinigami who experiences this would never be a Shinigami again. Mizuru's infinite rebirth after opening the enchantment seemed unbelievable, but the actual operation behind this was very simple. Since the most important thing in Shinigami was the soul, the body, the appearance was not the key. As long as the soul was intact, the body could even be reshaped wantonly without any problems. Mayuri, the mad scientist, the captain of the 12th Division, probably transformed his body based on this conjecture. Mizuru did not modify his body in any way. In the enchantment of his Benkei, once his body was damaged or even died, he had the power to condense spirit particles and rebuild a new body for himself and place his soul in it. So to defeat him, there was not only one way to go, that is, to break the enchantment, but there was a simpler and more direct way, which was to target his soul. But because his Zanpakuto was a soul-type Zanpakuto, in the enchantment, his soul would be protected extremely tightly. Therefore, if somebody wants to target his soul, they could only go back to the original method, which was to break the barrier. This was also why Mizuru had the confidence with play with the Soul Society's forces in Las Noches. In Noble Street, the world was crimson, and many members of the nobles were continuously dying one after another without knowing how and why, which was causing even greater panic. Some of the nobles have been systematically trained and were regular Shinigami. They immediately liberated their Zanpakuto and took precautions. However, the force that was killing the people around them was both invisible and intangible. They didn't even realize who the enemy was, before this same force directly eroded into their bodies, and then hooked out their souls and pulled them in Mizuru's direction for devouring. It's a bit like Gonzui, soul inhalation. Grimjaw watched many souls rushing towards Mizuru, and then being swallowed by the rippling blood mist around him, and couldn't help but think of an ability possessed by Yami. Back then, Yami used this ability in Karakura Town, causing death of many ordinary humans. After Yami performs Gonzui, the souls of ordinary humans around would involuntarily leave their bodies, and then be swallowed by him through his mouth like food. Mizuru smiled slightly when he heard Grimjaw's words. His ability was indeed a bit like Gonzui, but it was much more powerful and versatile than it. After all, Gonzui could not hook out Shinigami's soul out of their bodies, nor it could retain them for latter use. Of course, there were also restrictions, one that he needed to be in the barrier to display this ability, and besides that, there were some other restrictions. The change in Noble Street quickly attracted the attention of the rest of the Shinigami present in the Siriite AI. After all, such a big crimson barrier suddenly covered Noble Street, people outside couldn't get in, people inside couldn't get out, and again, the place covered by the barrier was the Noble Street, which itself was very strange. In the current Siriite AI, though most of the captains and vice-captains had gone to the world of living to participate in the battle, it was not like that there were no decent-ranking Shinigami left. Some of them were not very good at fighting, and so, they were temporarily left in the Soul Society to deal with logistics, such as Aizen. Though the vice-captain of the 13th Division of Imperial Guards' 8th Division, she was not very good at fighting, she did not even have a Zanpakuto. Although her Kido attainments were not bad, Kido's influence on a decisive battle of such a scale was minimal, so in the end, Shunsei chose to keep her back in Siriite AI. If it was the past, Nanao might have argued hard, but after knowing that Shunsui was her own uncle, how could Nanao not know that this was Shunsui's way of protecting her? He had always been like this, always protecting her from danger. Another reason why Nanao made up her mind to stay in Soul Society was that Shunsui mentioned Mizuru. He bluntly said that now that Mizuru had already gone to Hueco Mundo to participate in another battle, even if it was for Mizuru's sake, she should remain in Siriite AI so as to remain absolutely safe. The two men who were most important to her and were family to her had gone to their respective battles. Nanao knew that her fighting ability was mediocre, so in the end she followed Shunsei's words and stayed in Soul Society. It was also because she was one of the high-ranking Shinigami who stayed in Siriite AI that after learning of the incident in Noble Street, she immediately took some Shinigami and rushed towards Noble Street. When she came to the vicinity of Noble Street and saw the Crimson Enchantment, for some reason, Nanao felt that it was very familiar, and she also noticed an extremely familiar aura from it. After repeatedly failing to break through the barrier with the help of Kido, Nanao started trying to figure out another ways to enter the enchantment. With each moment, the Shinigami were getting more and more anxious because no one knows what was happening inside the enchantment. Just when they were at a loss for what to do, suddenly a Shinigami exclaimed, "The enchantment is gone." After Nanao found that the enchantment disappeared, she immediately looked towards Noble Street. The street was still the same street, it seemed that there was no change, but all the Shinigami sensed a little strangeness from it. Chapter 301, Everyone gathered because of the previous enchantment covering the place. No one knew if there was any ambush laid in the Noble Street, so Nanao hesitated for a long time before finally choosing to step into it. Behind her, many Shinigami who were following her also entered. Soon, a bunch of Shinigami's exclamation sounded. They gradually understood why Noble Street seemed so quiet, creepily so. Because the nobles living in it had been killed. They were lying on the ground. They didn't look injured at all, but they were breathless, and spiritual pressure's reactions had completely disappeared. There was no doubt that they were all dead. What the hell? What happened? Looking at the tragedy in front of her, Na now clenched her fists, with a dazed expression on her face. On the other side of Noble Street, Mizuru led Sojiro and Grimjow and was walking slowly. Suddenly, as if he sensed something, his steps came to an abrupt halt. Sojiro, who had become a tool man helping Mizuru carry the corpse, couldn't help but glance at Mizuru. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Mizuru shook his head and didn't explain anything. "Next, let's go to Karakura Town." "Karakura Town?" Grimjow couldn't help but ask. "Are we going to the one in the world of living?" "Not the fake one, but the real Karakura Town." Mizuru shook his head and answered Grimjow. Back in the world of living, Aizen's participation in the battle did not bring any changes to the battle. It was nothing more than adding another captain-level Shinigami. On the other hand, Byakuya, Renji, and Rukia, who went with Maki to pick up the injured Shinigami and brought them to the side to be healed by Anohana, were shocked to see Aizen, who suddenly joined the battle. Is he Ichigo's father? Ichigo's father is a Shinigami? Due to Aizen's appearance being quite different from when he was in the 10th Division, and Rukia and Renji were not in much of a position in 13th Division of Imperial Guards at that time, so they didn't have much contact with Aizen, so they were really not familiar enough. So looking at him wearing a Shyakusho, they were shocked realizing the fact that he was a Shinigami. No wonder that despite being a human, Ichigo has such great power. It turns out he is a child of a Shinigami and human. Rukia looked at Ichigo, who was also fighting against Aizen with Yoruichi, Kisuke, and Aizen in the distance ahead, and couldn't help but murmur. "Ichigo." Byakuya stared intently at Aizen. "If I'm not mistaken, he should be Captain Shiba, who has been missing for many years. What an interesting twist of fate." Anohana sighed. "Captain Shiba?" Rukia glanced sideways at Anohana. "Well, he is Shiba Aizen, the former captain of the 10th Division, mysteriously disappeared due to unknown reasons, and was later labeled as a defector by Central 46. It turns out that after he ran into the world of living, he changed his surname and started a family. I didn't expect that Kurosaki-kun was actually his son, but this also explains why Kurosaki-kun has such latent powers. He is from the Shiba clan after all. Even if the Shiba clan had declined and was not among the great nobles anymore, and Aizen was only the head of the branch house, but after all, being a former noble, still makes a difference. From the declining Shiba clan, powerful Shinigami such as Shiba Keion and Shiba Kakaku could still be born, which actually showed that the Shiba family was still not something to be trifled with. Even though Kakaku never joined 13th Division of Imperial Guards, she was undoubtedly strong, and Keion was now the new captain of 9th Division. Ichigo's father is a former captain of 13th Division of Imperial Guards. Hearing Anohana's words, Rukia and Renji couldn't help but be shocked. "Ah, I remember that in the early years of my joining, there was indeed a captain disappearance case. Captain Hitsugaya passed the captain's assessment after that and became the captain of the 10th Division. He also became the youngest captain of 13th Division of Imperial Guards." While talking, Rukia remembered another thing. That is, when she came to the world of living, every time she went to Ichigo's house, his father was not at home, and though occasionally she met him 1 or 2 times, his father looked out of tune sometimes. It was really difficult to put this wretched uncle and connect him with the Shiba clan, and the captain of the 10th Division back then. However, it's really a rare scene. The previous 10th Division captain, plus the previous 2nd Division captain, Shiyuin Yoruichi, the previous 12th Division captain, Urahara Kisuke, the previous Kido Corps commander, Tsukubishi Tessai, plus those guys lying on the ground over there, all the captains and vice-captains who left the Soul Society and were charged with betrayal. Almost all of our captains and vice-captains are gathered here. Anohana spoke slowly while healing everyone. Regarding the identity of Yoruichi, Rukia and others have heard some rumors, and she also helped Ichigo and others to break into Soul Society earlier, but the inconspicuous green hat shop manager turned out to be the previous captain of the 12th Division. It surprised young Shinigami such as Rukia and Renji, who were still inexperienced. After saying this, she said to Maki, "I have to trouble you again to bring those guys lying on the ground over there. After all, they used to be companions. In that case, it's not good to let them die like this." Maki nodded. "Those guys, so they were also members of the Soul Society?" Above on the roof, Rukia couldn't help looking at the members of the Vizard lying on the ground not far away. When they returned to the world of living, Aizen had already defeated the Vizard. She always felt that those guys were a little strange. Now it seemed that the backstory of these guys were not so simple. Especially what Anohana said last made her think of something. Counting those guys, all the captains are almost all together. The reason why it was almost was because there was one captain who is not here. Captain of 3rd Division, Kiyomizuru. It seemed that because of Aizen's participation in the war, together with Ichigo, Kisuke, and Yoruichi, it could now be regarded as 4 captain-level Shinigami besieging Aizen. Among the two Shinigami who defected to Hueco Mundo with Aizen earlier, Jin was somewhat unable to watch anymore. From the start of the decisive battle to the present, Kaname was seriously injured because of the fight against Sijin, while Jin was just watching the show from the beginning to the end. Right now, he finally chose to fight. He released his Bankai directly, sweeping across the air with an unbelievably long blade, making it impossible to ignore him as soon as he entered the fray. Jin, though a former vice-captain, was of course a Shinigami with captain-level combat power. As expected of that guy's vice-captain. Chapter 302, Unsealed in the Fake Karakura Town. Ichigo had to give up attacking Aizen because of Jin's participation, and then he started fighting against Jin. He was not familiar with Jin. When they first met, he was just someone following Mizuru. Although he got to know from Yoruichi that he had the title of a genius and vice-captain, Ichigo was not from the Soul Society, so he didn't bother to pay attention to Jin. Who does it had to do with him? Then Jin defected alongside Aizen, and so, this was the first time he had faced Jin in battle. After he actually fought against Jin, he found that Jin was really too difficult to deal with. Not to mention that he, as a person, was hard to deal with due to his unreadable intentions. The sword in his hand is even weirder. If one gets caught off guard, it would hit them instantly. The speed of its attacks were extremely fast. If Ichigo doesn't react on time, he would be hacked to death on the spot. Besides, this guy was also very black-bellied. He was chatting with him one moment and then randomly attacking the next moment. Ichigo couldn't help but curse after suffering a loss due to getting carried away with Jin's chatter. But in fact, cursing Jin was just an appearance, and what really made him feel heavy was Aizen's strength. Dad, Urahara-san, and Yoruichi-san joined forces, but they still couldn't do anything to Aizen. Aizen was walking around in a very leisurely manner. Because he had never seen the liberation of Kyokusuagetsu, Ichigo could see that this was the real situation. After using Kyokusuagetsu to mislead Yoruichi at first, and taking the opportunity to attack Ryu, Aizen did not use Kyokusuagetsu's power again. In other words, right now Aizen was purely using his own strength to contend with the three of them. How about it, are you desperate? Do you think that such an opponent is undefeatable? Jin attacked Ichigo lightly with Kamishini no Yari. After Ichigo barely blocked it, he squinted his fox-like eyes and said to Ichigo. He seemed to have seen through what Ichigo was thinking. What nonsense are you talking about? Dad and others can definitely defeat Aizen. Although Ichigo's thoughts was revealed by Jin, he was very stubborn verbally and was unwilling to admit it. Really? Jin grinned. Then let's just wait and see. The so-called wait and see, in fact, was not a long wait. Because Aizen gradually lost patience. After that, almost in an instant, he crushed Yoruichi and Isshin, and then inflicted a heavy blow on Kisuke. Ignoring Yoruichi and Isshin, Aizen took a deep look at Kisuke. He looked a little disappointed with him. Although Kisuke couldn't compete with him in terms of strength, in Aizen's view, the other party was the only Shinigami whose IQ could match his, but this one was particularly pedantic. If Kisuke recognized the reality and was willing to join him, how good it would be to have him on his side. Jin, let's go. The three of them were not killed on the spot, and Aizen said to Jin, who was still dealing with Ichigo. Jin swung his sword, forced Ichigo away, and then quickly followed Aizen's pace. Ichigo originally wanted to chase him, but he turned his head and saw his father lying on the ground, as well as Kisuke, Yoruichi, and finally gave up the idea. On the roof, Byakuya, Rukia and others, with the help of Anohana, gradually healed their injuries. Seeing that Aizen incapacitated Yoruichi, Urahara, Isshin almost in an instant, and was about to leave with Jin, they were going to stop Aizen immediately. Even if they were strong enough to be Aizen's opponent, they couldn't let his plot succeed in any way. Give up, Captain Kachiki. You have witnessed Aizen's strength. Even if you fight him, the result will not change. Then do you want him to go to the real Karakura town and create the Okayan? Byakuya was very clear about Aizen's purpose, and it was precisely because of knowing Aizen's purpose that it was impossible for them to let him succeed. Don't worry, it's not time for real despair yet. Anohana said. Even if the head captain has already been defeated, even if Aizen really creates the Okayan, it is not be so easy to enter the Spirit King's palace. You mean? As the head of the four nobles and the head of the Kachiki family, Byakuya was obviously more aware of the things in Soul Society than ordinary Shinigami. Immediately he thought of an organization dedicated to protecting the Spirit King exclusively. Zero Division. If Aizen really created the Okayan, and used it to enter the palace of the Soul King, and tried to invade the domain of the Soul King, then Zero Division would undoubtedly become the most powerful obstacle in front of him. And, if even Zero Division couldn't stop Aizen, then there seemed to be no need to resist anymore. Although he did not personally participate in this Karakura town decisive battle, But because of his previous experience in Hueco Mundo and when he came to the world of living and witnessed the tragedy of those captain-level powerhouses and Aizen's strength, Byakuya, the young head of Kachiki, gradually gave birth to a hint of despair. Aizen seemed to have no intention of paying attention to his seriously injured subordinates. Even Kaname, the former 9th Division captain who defected with him, was abandoned by Aizen because of his serious injuries. He took the only uninjured subordinate Jin, and with a wave of his hand, he opened the passage, and then the two figures stepped into it, heading towards Soul Society. Watching them closing off the passage, Byakuya, Rukia and others looked frustrated and uncertain. Suddenly, at this moment, a powerful spiritual pressure reaction suddenly appeared nearby, and then a bloody light shot up into the sky. This strange blood light inevitably made Byakuya think of Mizuru's Zanpakuto's condition after liberation, and his complexion couldn't help but sink. But after seeing the one that released the bloody light, his heart sank even more. Zero, Espada, Beelzebub. Seeing the figure bathed in blood, Byakuya muttered the other person's name. Among the enemies he had met in the Hueco Mundo's desert before, this one could be regarded as the most difficult one. Now, seeing the sealed Beelzebub breaking out of the seal, Byakuya immediately stood up, and was about to go forward to fight Beelzebub. His thoughts were probably, I can't handle Aizen, can't I handle at least you? Then, he saw countless streaks of blood flying out of Beelzebub's body, like drizzle, falling on the seriously injured Drankars and Kaname, and their injuries gradually began to heal stand up. Although there were some differences, but the same blood-red spiritual pressure, the same healing effect, this method inevitably reminded Byakuya of the person he least wanted to remember at that time. Kyo-Mizuru. Chapter 303. After the decisive battle in the world of living in the battle in Hueco Mundo, Mizuru hurt Byakuya's heart so deeply that he couldn't help but think of Mizuru the moment when he saw a similar technique to Mizuru, but he had to say that Beelzebub's move, it was indeed very similar to Mizuru's. After Mizuru's Zanpakuto is liberated, he could also inject his spiritual power into other people's bodies through the blood-red thread suspended in midair, and then heal them. The matter of Aizen can be put aside for now, and the situation we are going to face next is much more difficult. Anohana looked solemn. The same went for Byakuya, Rukia, and Renji. Below, Yoruichi, Kisuke, Isshin, and Ichigo also discovered the problem. Although the first three were defeated by Aizen, their injuries were not serious as Aizen held back. What a nasty ability for an enemy to have. Isshin sighed. Those Rankars had fought fiercely with Soul Society Shinigami, and in the end, both sides had suffered losses. But now, after bathing in the dripping blood, both their injuries on the body and their spiritual pressure gradually recovered. On the other hand, the Soul Society side was still seriously lacking. No wonder Aizen would abandon them directly and not kill them. It turned out that there was still this one waiting for them. On the roof, Byakuya couldn't help but look at Anohana. Captain Anohana. After the consumption in Hueco Mundo, I can't healing so many people at the same time. Anohana knew what Byakuya was thinking. Maybe the only one who could do this kind of non-stop healing is him. The creator of Kaido, Garanji Tenjiro. He is the most powerful healer that Anohana knew, and also the Shinigami possessing the most powerful Kaido. Kaido was created by him, and it was also because of the creation of Kaido that Tenjiro became a member of the Zero Division. The injured Rankars recovered quickly from their injuries. Among them, one Rankar noticed a Shinigami who was seriously injured on the ground, and immediately showed a ferocious smile, wanting to give the Shinigami a fatal blow. But Beelzebub's words suddenly rang in their ears. Is everyone healed? If you're all done healing, then go back to Hueco Mundo. Beelzebub, what are you saying? Hearing Beelzebub's words, Haribo looked at him curiously. Neil also had a strange look in her eyes. The two of them didn't really like fighting very much. They chose to become Rankars at the beginning, one to stop the indifferent killings, and the other was to protect the people around her. They never thought that Beelzebub, who always liked to fight and kill, would actually send them back to Hueco Mundo. Did Beelzebub took the decision of not attacking the Shinigami anymore? Or was he planning to let them return to Hueco Mundo first, and then fight everyone present here? Does he intend to take on these crippled Shinigami alone? It's possible. After all, with Beelzebub's arrogant character, he had a high probability of doing such a thing. It was because of his arrogance that he fell into the Shinigami's trap and was sealed before. But having said that, Beelzebub was able to break that seal, which really surprised them. Stark, Neil, Haribo and other Rankars looked at Beelzebub one after another. In the end, they chose to obey his words, and Stark took the initiative to open the Garganta and return to Hueco Mundo first. After all, Aizen had already left, and there was no order given to finish off these Shinigami. Now that their injuries have recovered due to Beelzebub's technique, it was meaningless to stay there. The decisive battle between Hueco Mundo and Soul Society had came to an end to some extent, and the next part of it would depend on Aizen. The first few Espada, except for the Baragon who has been swallowed by Beelzebub, Stark along with Lilinette, Niliel, and Haribel all left and returned to Hueco Mundo. The remaining Rankars, who were brought here by Aizen to participate in the decisive battle, and were in the lower rankings, even though some of them felt that the Shinigami should be wiped out, they did not dare to disobey Beelzebub's order in the end, and chose to step into the Garganta, and also left. Even Kaname, after glancing at the seriously injured Sijin, finally chose to step into it and return to Hueco Mundo. The decisive battle had turned to this point, and it was meaningless for Kaname to stay there any longer. Would he stay there waiting for someone from the Soul Society to imprison him and send him to the Soul Society for trial? So instead of staying there, it's better to go back to Hueco Mundo and wait for the final result of the battle. In an instant, almost the entirety of the Hueco Mundo's force left. This weird development of the events was beyond the expectations of Byakuya and others. It seems that there is no need to fight. Anohana also breathed a sigh of relief. In Hueco Mundo, she also saw the difficulty of these Espadas. It would be fine if there were just Rankars, or even the forefront of the Espada, who were seriously injured. But, even Anohana was finding it difficult to think of a way to face the Espada who were in good condition along with a bunch of Rankars while their side was still in not top condition. Maybe if Zaraki was in his peak state, he would be more than enough powerful to fight all these Rankars, but after giving his absolute best to break the enchantment of Mizuru's Benkei, Zaraki was still in a comatose state and had not yet woken up. No, there's still one left. Byakuya looked at Beelzebub, who had never stepped into the Garganta, with a wary expression. But if there is only one, it's not difficult to deal with. However, although Beelzebub did not step into the Garganta to return to Hueco Mundo and stayed in the present world, he did not attack any Shinigami, but just cast a cold glance at all the Shinigami present for some time. It was as if to intimidate them or perhaps to remember their faces, and then tore open a Garganta and stepped into it. Seeing such inexplicable behavior, even Kisuke, who has always been more insightful in things and close to a monster in IQ, was somewhat baffled. Then, his gaze went to Ichigo. Ishin also looked at Ichigo. Ichigo being the key to defeat Aizen wasn't just because he hadn't seen Kyoka Suigetsu's liberation, there's more to it than that and it was time to bring that into play. In the Soul Society, the outskirts of Siri-Itai, in one of the most remote parts of Rakongai, Karakura Town, which was transferred by the four-pillar barrier, was here. Mizuru brought Sojiro and Grimmjow there very smoothly. With the help of Inrakuten, Mizuru and his party came there from Siri-Itai almost unimpeded. During the period, no one noticed them. However, after arriving there, Mizuru was stunned. It turns out that Nanao is not the only high-ranking one staying back in the Soul Society. The entire Karakura town was transferred to the Soul Society, a place where so many human beings live. How could the Soul Society not send Shinigami to guard there? And the Shinigami who was in charge of guarding Karakura town was Matsumoto Ranjaku. Just when Mizuru arrived there, Ranjaku also discovered him. Chapter 304, Aizen and Jin arrives at the real Karakura town. Mizuru. Ranjaku was undoubtedly very excited when she saw Mizuru, and walked towards him subconsciously, but immediately after seeing the two people, Grimmjow and Sojiro next to Mizuru, she subconsciously stopped in her tracks. Sojiro wears a mask similar to that of a hollow, but if one looks carefully, they would find that his spiritual pressure was that of a Shinigami's, but Grimmjow was different, whether it was the broken mask on his face, or the spiritual pressure that was completely different from Shinigami, they were undoubtedly telling the fact that he was a hollow. What are they doing here? Ranjaku came back to her senses, and immediately looked at the two figures beside Mizuru with a serious expression. Mizuru, who didn't expect Ranjaku to be here, had a complex and subtle expression drawn at the corner of his mouth. Ranjaku, I'm sorry for this. I promise, this is the last time. Ranjaku was visibly agitated by Mizuru's incoherent reply and wanted to ask again, but the next moment, Mizuru's figure flashed away and came behind her. Ranjaku immediately felt a sense of uneasiness in her heart, and she subconsciously wanted to avoid it. However, Mizuru's movements were too fast for her to avoid. Her body softened suddenly, and she fell into an unconscious state. Just when her body was about to collapse to the ground, Mizuru caught her. Sojiro and Grimmjow looked at this scene with a little surprise. They didn't expect Mizuru to attack the other party as soon as they started talking, and it seemed that the relationship between Mizuru and this female Shinigami was very good. This couldn't help but want to ask about it. However, Mizuru didn't have any intention of explaining, and continued to move while saying to the two, "Let's go." The two figures nodded, and took a step. It was worth mentioning that Mizuru did not put the unconscious Ranjaku there, but just carried her and started moving. He now hilariously looked a bit like Sojiro, But Sojiro was carrying a dead body, while Mizuru was holding an alive woman. This made Grimjow glance at the two companions involuntarily, wondering if he should find someone to carry on his shoulders. Otherwise, he always felt that he looked out of place beside the two of them. And also they still don't know why Mizuru ordered Sojiro keep Zalapro's body with him. Was he telling others that he killed Zalapro? Or was it something else? Because he met Rinjaku near the real Karakura town, Mizuru didn't know exactly how many of his acquaintances stayed in Soul Society, and so he used Rakuten to hide their group, and successfully avoided the Shinigami's guarding around and arrived at the real Karakura town. The Shinigami have some really good methods. Grimjow praised unabashedly while looking at the real Karakura town, which was exchanged with a fake by the Syriite AI. Sojiro also thought so. After slaughtering the people of Central 46, his hatred for Soul Society had become much better. After beheading those high-ranking figures at will, he also gradually understood a truth. That is, the so-called power, political, was false, and only strength was what matters. As long as one had enough power, even those big people, they could control their fate at will. Also, after slaughtering Central 46, he was no longer immersed in hatred all the time, and became a little more sober. He is also not surprised that the Shinigami of the Soul Society have the power to transfer entire cities from the world of living. Inside the Karakura town, because the entire city was suddenly transferred to the Soul Society, before this, the Shinigami directly used some means to force the people of the entire city to fall into deep sleep. So walking on the road, they could even see some people sleeping on the road. Holding Rinjaku in his arms, Mizuru walked all the way to the middle of Karakura town. Then, placing Rinjaku carefully on the ground, he pulled out his own Zanpakuto. Following the time at Las Noches and the time at Noble Street, this was already the third time he was releasing Bankai that day. A crimson enchantment emerged, and then centering on him, it quickly diffused towards the surrounding. The space was torn apart, and a pitch-black opening emerged. Two figures walked out of it one after the other. They were Aizen Sosuke and Akamaru Jin. Jin's eyes flickered, and he couldn't help but look at Aizen in front of him. In the Dangai, precipice world, there were two things, Kaoru, resting flow, Kotatsu, resting surge. Kaoru is the current that is constantly flowing through the Dangai, in order to prevent enemies such as hollows from using it. The current stops souls from moving, and even 1 foot caught by it makes escape almost impossible. It encompasses the walls, capturing anyone who makes contact with them. And the other thing is called Kotatsu, which is the Dangai's equivalent to a street sweeper. The Kotatsu is not a being of spiritual pressure, but a being of reason who governs and controls time and space, and is initially thought to be impossible to harm using spiritual pressure. The Kotatsu appears once every 7 days to cleanse the area, killing anyone and everything that makes contact with it, to assure that no one can loiter and take advantage of the time distortion. It looks like the same material that makes up the Dangai, only molded into the shape of a bullet train, and a golden eye at the upper center of its body. If the Kotatsu touches a Zanpakuto or other spiritual weapon, the user and weapon are trapped, since the Kotatsu's body is flowing with the Kaoru current. The Soul Society has no means of sealing the Kotatsu. If a being is caught by the Kotatsu, they'll be thrown out to a greatly different point in time from when they entered the Dangai. Even the Shinigami were completely helpless against them. However, it was that same powerful Kotatsu, when facing Aizen, was destroyed by him with one move. Aizen's strength made Jin amazed, but then he took the attitude of taking it for granted because the other party was Aizen. But even so, his belief had never been shaken. After seeing Aizen hurt Rinjaku in his younger days, and Rinjaku almost dying due to it, he made up his mind that he must kill Aizen, take back what Rinjaku was robbed of, and take revenge for her. For this purpose, he did not hesitate to sneak into Aizen's side and do a lot of evil things for Aizen. How can he just give up by witnessing Aizen's power? Now, Aizen was only one step away from success. If he succeeds, he would create the Okayan and successfully invade the domain of the Soul King. He was already strong enough. If he was allowed to invade the domain of the King of Souls, things would be completely out of hand. Therefore, Jin gradually made a decision after the start of this decisive battle. It's time for him to do it. No matter how strong Aizen was, he couldn't just give up. With this in mind, Jin followed Aizen and walked slowly towards Karakura town. When approaching Karakura town, his footsteps stopped suddenly, and in the air, he felt a familiar spiritual pressure, which was Rinjaku's spiritual pressure. He was very familiar with Rinjaku's spiritual pressure. After all, when Rinjaku was almost killed by Aizen, it was he who divided a part of his soul and gave it to Rinjaku to save her life. Has Rinjaku been here before? Jin thought so, but his footsteps did not stop. In the blink of an eye, two figures came to Karakura town. Looking at the empty street, Jin's narrow eyes suddenly narrowed even more. Captain Aizen, Did you notice that something seems to be wrong? Chapter 305, The Real Kamishini no Yari Jin, what do you want to say? Aizen turned his head and glanced at Jin, somewhat curious. Doesn't Captain Aizen feel that this place is too quiet? Even after defecting to Hueco Mundo, Jin's address to Aizen had not changed, and he still calls him Captain. To some extent, this actually showed that Jin was a person who never forgets his past. Aizen had long been used to Jin's address, and he doesn't care about it, but Jin's words made him a little stunned, and then he carefully perceived his surroundings. It's really quiet. The whole street seemed to have been cleaned up in advance. Moreover, he felt a familiar aura on this street, which made him look thoughtful. Just when Aizen was engrossed in thoughts, 13 Division of Imperial Guards took a lot of trouble to transfer the whole Karakura town from the world of living to Soul Society, so there may be some ambushes set up by them. As Jin spoke, he drew his Zanpakuto and looked like he was on guard. Aizen didn't take Jin's words or actions to heart. After merging with Hogyoku, whether it was the current 13 Division of Imperial Guards or the Rankars of Hueco Mundo, he had never taken it to heart. There were only a few opponents worthy of his attention alongside the mysterious and unpredictable Zero Division. For Zero Division, after he created Okayan, he was destined to have a face-off with them. Aizen was also looking forward to it. Hikaifun Kiryu was from 12th Division and was the first Shinigami he had ever seen to be promoted to the Zero Division. There was no doubt that Kiryu was powerful, and besides her, there were other members of the Zero Division. Apart from Zero Division, there were other opponents that Aizen cared about. As long as he could successfully replace the Soul King and become the new owner of the Throne of Heaven, those opponents would no longer be in his eyes. That's right, Aizen was referring to Hueco, the ancestor of the Quincy's that built an empire in the shadow of Syriite Ai and hid in it for thousands of years. After Aizen learned of his existence, he designated him as an enemy. But in Aizen's view, no matter how strong Hueco was, he was at most at the level of Yamamoto. As long as he had enough information and understands his weaknesses, it was not difficult to deal with him. Just like Yamamoto, for him who possessed the strongest Zanpakuto Rijinjaku, he only needed to restrain Rijinjaku. Wasn't he defeated in this decisive battle just like that? Of course, because Hueco was hidden too deeply, little was known about him, and it was not so easy to find his weaknesses. So Aizen decided to choose another path. That's a one-shot. As long as one becomes a Soul King, under the absolute power, Hueco and his like are no more worth than that. Just as Aizen was imagining the scene after he creates the Okayan, suddenly, a sharp pain hit him. It was Jin. Aizen lowered his head first, glanced at the blade piercing his heart, then turned his head to look at Jin who was still squinting his eyes, looking very surprised. Is Captain Aizen surprised that I betrayed you? Jin spoke out Aizen's thoughts softly. Aizen was stunned for a moment, and then returned back to his calmness. Even though Jin's sword pierced his chest, he was still very calm and composed. I am really curious. As far as he was concerned, the few people who followed him, each had their own thoughts, and he had already known about it, but he didn't pay too much attention to it. In his opinion, the more ambitious the people around him, the better. In that case, one day they might be able to surprise him and he would not be so bored. Compared with Jin, Aizen cared more about Mizuru. Over the years, he had actually noticed some of Mizuru's small movements, but he didn't care. Compared with these details, the only thing he cared about is Mizuru's real strength. If Mizuru showed his real strength, could he make him happy? It's a pity that he hadn't had the chance to fight Mizuru so far. There was no chance before, and there would be no need in the future. After all, after he creates the Okayan, he would go on and become the Soul King, and he no longer would need an opponent like Mizuru to please him. After a flash of thought, Aizen said again. But now there is no need to ponder why you betrayed me. It was really unnecessary. He had already delayed a lot of time for this decisive battle. Right now, he just wanted to create the Okayan using the lives of the humans in Karakura town. Aizen immediately drew his sword and was about to liberate Kyoka Suigetsu. Jin's strength was not weak, and there was nothing more convenient than using Kyoka Suigetsu to eliminate him directly. However, the moment he drew his sword, the Zanpakuto that Jin had pierced into his body suddenly withdrew, and at the same time Jin's figure flashed, his palm stuck out, holding the sword in Aizen's hand in a panic. Aizen couldn't help but get startled. This time, he was really surprised. From outside perspective, it appeared that Jin was merely holding Kyoka Suigetsu's blade, but Aizen, as Kyoka Suigetsu's wielder, does know exactly what this action represented. How do you know? Aizen asked Jin. Jin said softly. Is Captain Aizen asking me how I know to crack Kyoka Suigetsu's hypnosis? Aizen nodded slightly. While he was talking with Jin, the wound on his body that was stabbed by Jin had been healed quickly under the ability of high-speed regeneration. Of course someone told me. The corners of Jin's lips were slightly raised. So it's him. Although Jin didn't say who it was, Aizen guessed it. Of course, the bottom of his heart was still very curious. He didn't tell anyone about Kyoka Suigetsu's cracking method, but Mizuru knew it. What an interesting discovery. Aizen was about to tell Jin that even without Kyoka Suigetsu's perfect hypnosis, his strength was not what he could handle. But suddenly, a sharp pain hit, and Aizen's complexion couldn't help but change drastically. What did you do to me? In Captain Aizen's opinion, what is my Zanpakuto's ability? Jin asked Aizen. Without waiting for Aizen to respond, he said again. You think that it's instant extension and contraction? It's ultimate's piercing speed? It's the length of extension boosted by its speed? Actually, it's neither of these things. With a smile on the corner of his mouth, he raised the sword in his hand. A very small piece of the sword in his hand was missing at some point. My Zanpakuto's true ability, as well as its deadliest aspect, is not based on its length or speed, but rather its ability to turn into dust for just a second when it expands and contracts. There is a deadly poison inside the blade that dissolves and breaks down cells, which causes the target to completely break down and dissolve at the cellular level from the inside out. This is the real Kamishini no Yari. Chapter 306, Killer Move Against Aizen Koro's, Kamishini no Yari. Even Aizen was helpless against toxins at the cellular level. He could only feel that his body was exhausting, withering, and then fell powerlessly to the ground. His expression had obvious agitation and anger. He never thought that Jin was still hiding this kind of power. He not only knew his Kyoka Suigetsu's cracking method, but even hid the true power of his Zanpakuto. No wonder he chose to take the initiative to stand up against Ichigo Kurosaki in Karakura Town earlier, and even used his Benkei. He wanted to showcase his power once more to paralyze my vigilance. Aizen thought in his heart, he had already understood the real intentions of Jin's actions during this whole time. That's clever, Jin. It had to be said that Jin's ultimate move was really hidden from him quite thoroughly. Even he assumed that Jin's Benkei was really as simple as extending and contracting, revolving around its ultimate piercing power granted by the speed of its expansion and contraction, but he never realized that those abilities were just the outer appearances, and its real ability was to release poison at cellular level by allowing the Zanpakuto pierce the body. Judging from the appearance of a gap in the blade, the use of this ability would obviously cause damage to Zanpakuto, and it might even be permanent, but it was a really strong ability. Another sharp pain hit his body, and Aizen looked up and saw Jin walking in front of him. Jin, you bastard. Aizen gritted his teeth in anger. Jin still had the same expression as ever, with a smile drawn on the corner of his mouth. Captain Aizen, you are really strong. Even I didn't expect it to be so easy. I can only say that after you merged with Hogyoku, you became a little too arrogant. For that, I can only offer my condolences to you. While speaking, Jin suddenly squatted down, then reached out his hand, pierced Aizen's chest, and then with a violent pull, he forcefully pulled out the Hogyoku that he had integrated into Aizen's body. After Hogyoku was pulled out by Jin, Aizen was at the end of his strength because of the toxin continuously dissolving his cells, so he only had time to make an unwilling roar. Jin. Then he died. Jin got up and didn't continue to look at Aizen's body anymore. He was very confident in his Zanpakuto, especially he even pulled out the Hogyoku from Aizen's body. After the absence of Hogyoku, Aizen also lost the last hope of making a comeback. Jin looked at the Hogyoku in his hand as he walked forward, thinking about how to destroy it later. Suddenly, the Hogyoku in his hand shone and disappeared. Jin was startled. How is that possible? Immediately, he felt a sharp pain. An arm suddenly pierced through his chest. Jin, I have to say, you really surprised me. The figure of Aizen suddenly appeared behind him. After Jin pierced his chest, he also responded in kind. Blood dripped from the corner of Jin's mouth. He wanted to say something, but Aizen seemed to have lost his patience. With a sudden force, Jin's heart was completely destroyed, and then he pulled out his hand, dripping with Jin's blood. He glanced at Jin's body lying on the ground, and the corner of his mouth drew up, forming a grim smile. To be honest, what happened previously, even he hadn't expected it. He didn't think that Jin would know Kyoka Suigetsu's weakness, and he didn't give enough thought about Jin Zanpakuto's true ability. At that moment of death, he was desperate and filled with unwillingness. As a result, Hogyoku proved itself and exceeded even his expectations. Under the power of Hogyoku, he was reborn again, and even the Hogyoku that was taken out by Jin returned to him on its own. He could feel himself becoming more closely fused with Hogyoku. There was no doubt that he had gone through another evolution. That's why he said Jin surprised him. It not only referred to Jin's betrayal, but also referred to the fact that Jin provided him another evolution. If he was only 80% sure about the creation of the Okayan before, then after this evolution, he was already 100% sure. Even if the mysterious Zero Division members appeared in front of him, he would not have any psychological burdens at all. Aizen walked on. Until a figure suddenly struck him, pushing his body away and leading him all the way towards the outer area of Karakura town. He looked at this figure with curiosity. Ichigo Kurosaki? In Aizen's perception, all the spiritual pressure in Ichigo's body at this moment had disappeared, and he looked almost like an ordinary human. But at the same time, the power erupted by the other party actually pushed his body to this place involuntarily. What on earth did he do? Another place in Karakura town after Aizen was forcibly taken away from Karakura town by Ichigo. Grimmjow and Sojiro couldn't help but look at Mizuru. In front of them, there was a light curtain, which was reflecting the place where Aizen was before, and Jin's body was lying on the ground at this moment. You expected all this? Grimmjow couldn't help but ask Mizuru. The appearance of Ichigo was so unexpected, and the strength he showed, also made Grimmjow, who was watching, astonished at the turn of events. Although he saw Ichigo only for a moment, Ichigo's strength had undoubtedly become stronger again, and it was to the point where he was able to forcibly take Aizen, who had just been resurrected and easily killed Jin, away from there. Another detail that Grimmjow noticed was that Ichigo seemed to have grown a lot longer in terms of physical age. His hair had grown and his height also had increased. Aizen is not a god, there are always things he can't predict. With the help of Hogyoku's power, he has obtained several evolutions and has broken through the boundaries of Shinigami, but the Shinigami side, although it does not seem that they could be his opponent at the moment, it was impossible for them to sit back and watch him achieve his goal and create the Okayan. Ichigo Kurosaki, in a way, is what the Shinigami side is using against Aizen. So it's not unexpected that he would interfere at this point. Mizuru explained to Grimmjow. Grimmjow thought for a moment, and then said. However, even the Shinigami didn't think that there would be you besides Aizen. They probably never thought that you would come here before Aizen. While following Mizuru's side, this brief contact had already made Grimmjow understand a little bit about him. What he understood was, this guy, Kyo-Mizuru, was someone that was no less dangerous than Aizen. Just like the case of Central 46, the highest judiciary organ of the Soul Society, both of them could kill them as long as they want, and they really had no scruples about it. Mizuru smiled lightly and did not respond to this. Chapter 307, Jin's Dream. I'll leave first. Mizuru said to the two people beside him, and immediately, a blood-red ripple quietly appeared in the air, and his figure disappeared. Previously Mizuru had liberated his Zanpakuto in Karakura town. When Aizen and Jin arrived, Mizuru actually had not removed his Bankai. The enchantment had always existed. In other words, the barrier had already covered the space where Karakura town was located, and as long as Mizuru was willing, it could turn this place into that blood-red land. It was also because of the enchantment covering this area that Mizuru and others could watch from there without a worry, allowing them to peek into what was going on with Jin and Aizen. Because this space already belonged to Mizuru, and everything that happened in it could not be hidden from Mizuru. Aizen and Jin were able to step into it without feeling anything was thanks to Mizuru's letting go of the restrictions of the enchantment and never stopping them. The other end of Karakura town. Mizuru's figure emerged from Jin's corpse. Was it really necessary? He had known about Jin's determinations for a long time. To be honest, for someone like Jin who for a goal, would not hesitate to lie dormant by Aizen's side for 100 years to achieve it was really something. Jin's persistence made him feel deeply moved. While thinking this, he raised his palm, and a blood-red light surged and then rushed towards Jin's body. The wound stabbed by Aizen on his chest quickly healed. The wounds on the body are already healed, and the next step is the soul. Fortunately, this was the space created by Mizuru's Bankai, and he deliberately manipulated it secretly when watching the battle, temporarily locking Jin's soul, and intercepting his last sliver of life when he fell to the ground. If it was a little bit late, even if this was inside Mizuru's enchantment, he would still be powerless to revive him, and could only watch him die. After all, Mizuru's enchantment could only guarantee his own rebirth, but it could not guarantee the ability to revive others. Otherwise, if he wanted to fight, he could directly open the barrier to cover a certain area, and use this area as a battlefield, and the people belonging to his side in it could be reborn infinitely, and there would be no need for him to fight at all. Opposite side would surrender directly. Jin just felt like he was having a long dream. In the dream, he seemed to return to his childhood. At that time, he and Ranjaku had just met, and he didn't even have thought about becoming a Shinigami. Although life in Rakongai was not a good one, he enjoyed it very much, until one day, he found out that something happened to Ranjaku. At that time, in a hurry, he had to hide, but he firmly remembered one figure. That was Aizen Sosuke. Later, he tried his best and was finally able to save Ranjaku's life, but since then, he had made up his mind that he must take back what that man took from Ranjaku. For this reason, he made his choice to become a Shinigami, and joined the Shino Academy with this purpose in mind. Then, he he gradually discovered that the Shinigami who attacked Renjaku that day was Aizen, the vice captain of the 5th Division. However, he did not rush to report and expose Aizen because of this. Because Jin knew very well that since Aizen dared to do that kind of thing secretly, he would not be afraid of being reported by random people, and according to the information he knew, Aizen was a well-known good person in the entire Syriite AI at that time. Even if he said Aizen was a bad person, no one would believe him, a new student at the academy. Given those circumstances, he finally chose another path, to join Aizen, then gain Aizen's trust, and take advantage of Aizen's unpreparedness to seek justice for Renjaku. So after joining 13th Division of Imperial Guards, he chose the 5th Division without hesitation. Then, he found Aizen directly, expressed his determination to join Aizen's command. In order to gain Aizen's trust, he also obeyed Aizen's order and killed the 3rd seat of the 5th Division of that time, so that Aizen could get a hold of his crime and be freer with him. Since then, he had been following behind Aizen. He even helped Aizen to backstab Hueco Shinji, the captain of the 5th Division, and others. He thought he could keep following Aizen like that until one day when he would gain his complete trust. As a result, another figure appeared in front of him. Kyo, who had just taken over as the captain of the 3rd Division. This guy not only showed an unusual relationship with Aizen, but also asked Aizen to transfer him to his division. To Jin's surprise, Aizen actually agreed to his request. This once made him wonder whether Aizen had discovered some of his hidden ambitions and that's why he deliberately transferred him to the 3rd Division. But on the bright side, he couldn't refuse Aizen's arrangement, and in the end he could only go to there. At the beginning, he was wary of Mizuru, but then he started hesitating due to his actions, and gradually changed his views because Renjaku suddenly broke into the 3rd Division and established a deep friendship with Mizuru. This was something he hadn't expected. It was also because of Renjaku that he began to pay closer attention to Mizuru. Later, he suddenly had a feeling that maybe Mizuru and Aizen were not completely of the same front. Because of this, he began to pay more and more attention to his actions. Thinking about it now, he suddenly found out that before he defected to Hueco Mundo along with Aizen, his life in the 3rd Division was actually quite memorable. Although there were endless team affairs to deal with, at least there was no such anxiety in him like when he was around Aizen. In addition, he doesn't even know what happened to the persimmon tree he planted after he defected. Jin's thoughts flickered, and then he suddenly discovered something. Wait, haven't I already died? How come there are so many inexplicable thoughts? Then, Jin suddenly opened his eyes. You're awake. Jin saw a familiar figure in his eyes, and at the same time, a familiar calm voice came to his ears. Jin stared blankly at Mizuru for a long time before he realized his situation. He sat up slowly, stroked the wound on his body, and then said, I'm not dead? He seemed very much shocked about the fact that he was not dead. I came just in time, so you barely survived. Mizuru replied to Jin's words. Then Aizen. He's fighting Ichigo Kurosaki. Chapter 308, Control Your Own Destiny. Ichigo Kurosaki. Jin was no stranger to Ichigo. The human boy Aizen had been paying attention to was essentially the child of a Shinigami and a Quincy. He had inherited the blood of both of the races naturally, and because his mother was eroded by the hollow created by Aizen before giving birth to him, the power of hollow was also added to his body. Shinigami, hollow, and Quincy were against each other, but their powers were all stored in Ichigo's body. It was an incredible thing in itself. For this reason, Aizen had great expectations for the Ichigo's future. After he was born, he had been closely watching his growth. Later, Ichigo became a Shinigami by coincidence, and proved that he was indeed worthy of Aizen's expectations of him. In a short period of time, he learned Bankai and possessed captain-level combat power. No, rather than saying that he obtained captain-level combat strength, it was better to say that he was digging out the power that already existed in his body step by step. Once his strength is fully tapped out, no one knows how far he could go. But according to Jin's current opinion, although Ichigo was very strong, he might not be able to deal with Aizen. A dejected look slowly appeared on his face. You seem to have not much hope on Ichigo Kurosaki? Mizuru glanced at Jin and said calmly. Jin was silent. He really was not optimistic about Ichigo, but if anyone was likely to be Aizen's opponent, among the people around him he was the likely one. Why did you save me? After pondering for a while, Jin asked Mizuru. You should be on the same side as Aizen. Even at this time, are you still testing? Mizuru looked at Jin, and revealed his real purpose in one sentence. Jin smiled lightly, and didn't try to hide it. Although it was Captain Mizuru who told me the method of cracking Aizen's Kyokusuagetsu, I still want to know if you and Aizen are on the same side? It seemed that because of having died once, Jin no longer chose to hide his feelings, and became very straightforward. Although this was different from Jin's previous way of behavior and might bring harm to him, But he felt a burst of relief. After all, he had already died, and the worst that could happen to him was nothing more than dying again. Whether Aizen and I have the same goal or whether we are truly on the same side, don't you already know? Jin was silent. He did already know the answer. However, I still don't understand why you betrayed Aizen? Jin was a little puzzled. If we talk about his betrayal, it's because he had disliked Aizen from the very beginning, and wanted to take revenge on Aizen and take back what he took from Rinjaku. What about Mizuru? What is his goal? What is his motivation? I had to follow Aizen at the beginning as at that time I really didn't have a choice. So sometimes, whenever I had a choice or chance, I always try to see if I can break through the shackles and take control of my own destiny. For so many years, although Aizen seemed to have a free-ranging attitude towards Mizuru. In fact, from the moment Aizen brought Mizuru out of Hueco Mundo, there had been a shackle on him that had been restricting Mizuru. So, Mizuru bid his time. While staying with Aizen, he took many steps for his own future. On his way he also changed some things of the original story. It was his way to continuously tell himself that nothing was predetermined. The changes that he made always reminded him that he was capable of changing destinies, and so he did exactly that. Jin didn't understand this, so his thoughts returned to Aizen, who had evolved again with the help of Hogyoku earlier, feeling lost for a while. He tried his best, but he still failed to take revenge for Rinjaku. Although he survived, he didn't seem to be as happy as he imagined. Let's go. After Mizuru said to Jin, who was lost in thought. Although Jin didn't know where Mizuru was going to take him, but because of Mizuru, he was lucky enough to survive, so he chose to go along with him. He left here with Mizuru, and soon, they came to where Grimmjow and Sojiro were. Jin didn't take a second look at Grimmjow and Sojiro. After he came there, his eyes were glued on a woman lying on the ground. Rinjaku. When Jin came near Karakura town earlier, he had sensed Rinjaku's spiritual pressure, but he never thought that she was here. Then, his eyes couldn't help falling on Mizuru. There was no doubt that Rinjaku being there was due to Mizuru. If Mizuru was going to do something harmful to Rinjaku, he would fight Mizuru to death even if he was currently able to live because of Mizuru. Mizuru knew Jin's queries, so he explained before he could even ask. I just met her when I came to Karakura town. It seems that she is one of the Shinigami staying in Soul Society. Don't worry about her, she's fine. Although Mizuru explained, Jin still rushed to Rinjaku, and carefully sensed her spiritual pressure and body's condition. Jin couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief after finding that she had just fallen unconscious and nothing else. But then, he had a new question. What exactly are you planning to do? Did you come here just to wait like this? If you really plan to deal with Aizen, then put it into action. Could it be possible that you really pinned all your hopes on Ichigo? You don't think Ichigo Kurosaki can win Aizen, do you? Of course, Ichigo's potential was extremely high, and him becoming a captain-level Shinigami was just a small part of his untapped potential, but Jin doesn't think he could beat Aizen. Coincidentally, Grimmjow had asked Mizuru similar questions before, and expressed his distrust about Ichigo defeating Aizen. Mizuru couldn't help laughing when he heard these words. Why don't you guys believe in him? Hasn't he proven himself quite a number of times? If our world is a story, then Ichigo Kurosaki is a well-deserved protagonist. The power contained in his body is much greater than what you can even imagine. Just wait and see. Ichigo and Aizen were engaged in a fierce battle. With Hogyoku's help, Aizen had undergone several evolutions. Shinigami's power and Hollow's power had been completely fused with Hogyoku's help, and at the same time, his appearance had also undergone tremendous changes. Unfortunately, Aizen didn't know that when his style of painting began to collapse and he stopped being a human being, he was actually very close to defeat. On the other hand, his opponent, Ichigo's painting style at the moment was at unprecedented peak. Waist-length black hair, cold eyes, and a Zanpakuto fused with his hand. Chapter 309, Kurga, Saigo no Getsuga Tensho. Is this the power you have right now? How ridiculous. After several evolutions, Aizen's appearance at this moment was enough to be called ferocious. He looked at Ichigo and spoke with a voice full of disdain. Admittedly, Ichigo right now had his spiritual pressure completely gone for some reason, and the power of his attacks were really good. But in Aizen's view, this was indeed extremely ridiculous. Whether it's Shinigami or Hollow, their battles were essentially battles of spiritual pressure. Once all the spiritual pressure disappears, even though one had gained great strength in a short period of time, this way of becoming stronger was obviously flawed. For Ichigo, there might be another reason, that is, he was now on a higher dimension compared to Aizen, and thus his spiritual pressure was not being perceived by him. Aizen also thought about this kind of conjecture, but he rejected it immediately. Impossible. He obtained his current strength with the help of Hogyoku, and successfully evolving several times. What about Ichigo? Without Hogyoku, It was obviously impossible to obtain a higher level of evolution than him in such a short amount of time. So the final conclusion he reached was that Ichigo really gave up all his spiritual pressure and in exchange, he gained short-lived strength. What a disappointment. Even though, he had a lot of expectations for Ichigo before, but Ichigo gave him such an answer. Aizen felt a little lost. But soon he gradually became relieved. After all, he had evolved to a new level now, and his vision had become different. In the past, Ichigo, whom he was always looking forward, was now just mediocre to him. Aizen immediately launched another attack. Relying on the powerful strength he gained after evolution, he easily crippled one of Ichigo's arm. This made Aizen even surer of his evolution. Ichigo Kurosaki, so that's it for you? But then, Aizen's heart trembled again, and he couldn't help but calm his mind quickly. Because after one of his arm was crippled, Ichigo finally used the technique he learned in Dangai to use as his final trump card in this battle. When Aizen and Jin came to Soul Society earlier, he also stepped into Dangai with his father, and learned from his father the fact that the flow of time in Dangai was much different than that of Soul Society. That is to say, as long as it was used properly, he could get a long period of training in that place while not much time passes in reality. And during this whole period of time, he had been learning the unique technique taught by his father, which is called Final Getsuga Tensho. According to what Isshin said, once this move was used, all of his Shinigami abilities would be completely lost. Although he could no longer remain a Shinigami from then on, as long as he could defeat Aizen and protect the people around him, his hometown, Karakura Town, and Soul Society, it would be worth it, so Ichigo started learning without any hesitation. During that time, he experienced some complicated things. But in the end, he managed to learn it. And by the time he rushed to Karakura Town, his hair and height had grown visibly longer, showing his long stay in Dangai. Ichigo recalled a voice that only he knew, and then, the Zanpakuto in his hand completely dissolved and disappeared. Black spiritual pressure covered most of his body. He raised his uninjured right hand, and with a light wave, all the spiritual pressure turned into a huge black crescent-shaped attack and poured away. Kurga, Saigo no Getsuga Tensho. This is my final Getsuga Tensho, Mugetsu. Ichigo recalled a voice that only he knew, and then, the Zanpakuto in his hand completely dissolved and disappeared. Black spiritual pressure covered most of his body. He raised his uninjured right hand, and with a light wave, all the spiritual pressure turned into a huge black crescent-shaped attack and poured away. Aizen sensed Ichigo's movement and couldn't help but being startled because he understood at that moment. It turns out that Ichigo's spiritual pressure hadn't disappeared. He was just on a higher dimension compared to him. Immediately afterwards, the huge black crescent attack enveloped and swallowed him, and Aizen was forced to endure tremendous pain. He suffered unprecedented severe injuries in an instant, and was even forcibly beaten back to his original form from the hollow state by Ichigo. Unfortunately, that's all. Even if Ichigo wanted to launch another attack on Aizen, there was nothing he could do. Because all of his Shinigami powers was poured out under that Mugetsu, at this moment, he no longer had any power. His body couldn't help but stagger for a while, and was about to fall to the ground. On the opposite side, Aizen struggled to stand up. He looked at the weak Ichigo, who almost fell to the ground, and said with a ferocious laughter, "Ha ha ha. Ichigo Kurosaki, I am going to win in the end." He raised his disintegrating Kyokusuagetsu. Did you see that? Ichigo Kurosaki. My Zanpakuto is disappearing. Do you know what that means? It means that Hogyoku judged that I no longer need a Zanpakuto. Just like your Zanpakuto was integrated with your hand, the fusion between me and my Zanpakuto has also begun. No. Compared to the degree of fusion between you and your Zanpakuto, I and my Zanpakuto are integrated at a completely different level. Ha ha ha. Because of the Mugetsu, Aizen no longer thought that Ichigo had abandoned his spiritual pressure previously, but that Ichigo somehow fused with his Zanpakuto and achieved some kind of evolution which was even higher to his previous self. Apparently, however, his evolution through Hogyoku was more powerful in the end. Just as Aizen wanted to walk to Ichigo. That same moment, a lightsaber suddenly pierced his body, and then, countless lightsabers emerged one after another, and his complexion changed drastically. He suddenly realized that his power was disappearing. What happened? Aizen looked puzzled. Just like when Jin hid Shinso's true ability and almost killed him once by outsmarting him, this time, it was also something that he didn't expect. Just when Aizen was puzzled, Gisuke appeared. Then gave Aizen the answer. During the previous battle in Karakura Town, he always used Kido to fight at the beginning, not because he thought Kido was better at dealing with Aizen, but to take the opportunity to plant some things into Aizen's body, and then form the final seal at an appropriate time. If Aizen had maintained a strong power, this seal was obviously incapable of playing any role. But after Ichigo gave up all his Shinigami powers to use Mugetsu, Aizen was seriously injured and his strength had also declined temporarily. The Hogyoku in his body thought that Aizen's current self was not enough to bear any power for the time being. And so, the seal began to work. So, it wasn't Ichigo, and it wasn't Gisuke who defeated Aizen, but Hogyoku. Looking at Aizen, who was in disbelief, Gisuke spoke seriously. After all, Aizen was also one of the creators of Hogyoku. How can there be such a ridiculous thing? Aizen couldn't accept it. He didn't expect that he would lose like this. Afterwards, looking at the complacent Gisuke, Aizen seemed to be agitated and remember something, and said to Gisuke, "Do you really think you have won, Hurahara Gisuke? Do you think this is the end?" Chapter 310, time to finish it off maybe. "But you didn't win either, did you, Aizen?" Gisuke thought that Aizen was unwilling to admit his failure, and seeing him ending up in such a state, he couldn't help but respond to Aizen. Hearing Gisuke's calm words, Aizen immediately became even angrier. He himself didn't know why he was angry. Maybe it was because the person who said these words was Gisuke. "Hurahara Gisuke, do you know that I despise you? You obviously have an intellect comparable to mine, but you are willing to succumb to something like that." "Something like that? You?" Gisuke's expression froze when he heard the hidden meaning in Aizen's words. "So you really know about it?" Aizen noticed the momentary change in Gisuke's expression, and knew the answer immediately. Somehow, before he knew the correct answer, he got angry to the ultimate, and after really knowing that Gisuke understood the existence of the thing but was still willing to be subjugated, he was not so much angry anymore. It's fine if Gisuke didn't know, but he knew what the Soul King actually is, but still succumbed to it. This only showed that Gisuke was also a pedantic person. It was a waste of his excellent mind. "Aizen, you won't understand," Gisuke said to Aizen. Since he met Aizen, he never had such a peaceful conversation with Aizen, but in Gisuke's view, Aizen, who was trying to replace the Soul King, really does not understand what the Soul King meant to the three realms. It meant peace and stability. The existence of the Soul King was indispensable. And Aizen was an out-and-out careerist who wanted to replace the Soul King and break the existing peace and stability of the three realms. In order to maintain this peace and stability, they had to stop Aizen. "Really? From my point of view, it is you who don't understand," Aizen said coldly, and then returned to his previous statement. "Hurahara Gisuke, even if you beat me, it's not over yet. The 1,000-year-old feud is about to come to the surface. I really want to know how the Soul Society will deal with that group of enemies lurking in the dark. Also, don't think that you guys can really protecting Karakura Town. After all, he and the Soul Society were hostile camps, so Aizen did not directly inform Gisuke about the Quincy's plans. In addition, just after stepping into Karakura Town earlier, when he was resurrected with the help of Hogyoku, he once sensed an extremely familiar aura. If Ichigo hadn't appeared at that time, he was going to meet that guy. Right now, he had lost. But that person, who had been hiding in Karakura Town from early on, obviously wasn't there to do nothing. Gisuke frowned slightly when he heard Aizen's words. He didn't think that Aizen would lie at this time, and asked him carefully for more details, but Aizen chose to keep his mouth shut. As a last resort, Gisuke could only continue to choose to strengthen the seal and seal him up completely. After all, something like Hogyoku, which already had self-will, at this moment, it might temporarily decline Aizen because of his diminished power and betray him, but then the next moment it might recognize Aizen as its master again. Moreover, the ability of this thing was really strange. If they didn't see Aizen now, it might not be possible later. Aizen's mouth, nose and eyes were immediately covered by a white substance, and soon, he turned into a humanoid statue without any breath leaking from it. After Gisuke was done with these things, he also breathed a sigh of relief. Then he looked at Ichigo on the opposite side. Ichigo had lost all his Shinigami powers after using the final Getsuga Tensho, and was almost like an ordinary person. Is this the end? Ichigo forcefully supported his body, glanced at the sealed Aizen, and asked. It's almost over. Gisuke responded, and asked Ichigo. What is Kurosaki-san going next? I want to visit Karakura Town first. His Hueco Mundo trip, although the time was not long, but Ichigo felt both physically and mentally exhausted after going through countless battles, and now he just wanted to go to Karakura Town to see his family and friends. The Karakura Town in his mouth was obviously not the fake Karakura Town in the world of living, but the real Karakura Town that was temporarily transferred to the Soul Society. He took Aizen away there before, and he had sensed the aura of some of his classmates. Gisuke nodded, and didn't plan stop or accompany Ichigo. Compared to Ichigo, who wanted to go to Karakura Town to see his family and friends' safety, he still needed to guard Aizen there at that moment, and then wait for the people to temporarily receive Aizen. For the crimes committed by Aizen, he would be sentenced to imprisonment in the most terrifying prison in the Soul Society, Mugen. As for killing Aizen, after merging with Hogyoku, it's not that easy to kill him. Exiling him was also unrealistic. The safest way to deal with Aizen was to seal and imprison him forever. Ichigo forcefully supported his body and walked towards Karakura town step by step. With all of his Shinigami powers gone, and the after effects of the battle, his body had become extremely weak. Previously, when he returned to the fake Karakura town to participate in the battle, he was also in a state of powerlessness. He forcibly made his body capable of fighting with the help of Anohana's Kaido. Now, not only all that was catching up, but also the power of Shinigami was knocked out of his body. He had never felt so empty and powerless. Fortunately, everyone is finally safe. Ichigo thought so, and a faint smile formed on the corner of his mouth. In Karakura town, both Mizuru and Jin sensed the battle result in the distance. Aizen lost? Jin felt a little unbelievable that Aizen's spiritual pressure, which was so strong before, now it suddenly disappeared, and so he had a guess that made him feel unable to believable. That is, Aizen might have lost. Of course, there was also a possibility that Aizen evolved again with the help of Hogyoku and he could no longer perceive Aizen's spiritual pressure. He is indeed defeated. Mizuru confirmed Jin's guess. He continued then. Since he has already lost, then I will also finish it on my end. Jin's heart trembled. He thought that Mizuru was going to deal with the disabled people of Soul Society. Aizen had already caused the Soul Society's combat power great damage. If Mizuru, who was in full strength, made a move now, the Soul Society would undoubtedly lose in this battle. But then, Jin realized that he was wrong. Mizuru didn't choose to go to attack the Soul Society, instead he seemed to be planning to do something else. He just waved his hand casually. In an instant, the entire Karakura town turned crimson, and a blood-red mist hung in the air. In Karakura town, due to the passage of time, some people had already woken up from their coma. What on earth is it? Raisawa Tatsuki looked at the blood-red world with a dazed expression. Outside Karakura town, Ichigo, who was walking towards there, looked at Karakura town shrouded in blood-red enchantment, and his complexion changed drastically. Chapter 311, and a crimson enchantment had surrounded the Karakura town. When Ichigo looked at his hometown suddenly getting covered by the enchantment, his complexion changed drastically. He wanted to rush to the direction of Karakura town, but right now in his state, even walking seemed a bit difficult, and it was practically impossible for him to get to Karakura town in a short time. At the same time, in Rakongai, a team of Shinigami from the Soul Society also noticed the enchantment covering Karakura town. That is, the complexion of the leader of that team, Nanao, couldn't help but change, because what was happening right now was completely identical to what happened in Noble Street before. She was there at this time because she discovered that there were waves of powerful spiritual pressure near Rakongai, which was the effect of the previous battle between Aizen and Ichigo, but she did not expect that before she arrived at the battle location, she would see the real Karakura town covered in an enchantment. Previously, the Noble Street was also covered by such an enchantment, and then when the enchantment dissipated, and most of the noble members in it were dead. Could it be that Karakura town will also become like that? Thinking of this, Nanao felt cold all over her body. The scope of Noble Street was not too small, but it definitely couldn't match the size of Karakura town. She didn't even have an idea about how many human beings lived there. Is it Aizen's work? Nanao immediately thought of Aizen, one of the owners of spiritual pressure from the previous Rakongai battle. After their final face-off, both Ichigo's and Aizen's spiritual pressure had a significant drop, so she was able to perceive it, and was sure that it was Aizen's spiritual pressure. She was not very clear about the situation of the decisive battle, but at this time of crisis, she had no choice but to do anything she could to contribute, even if her strength was so meager. Moreover, when something happened in Karakura town, she couldn't help but feel bad for another person. She was worried about her current state. Matsumoto Rinjaku. Although Rinjaku made Nanao feel a sense of crisis once for a while, but that was later sorted out and they became quite the acquaintances. She was now worried about her who was stationed in the real Karakura town. She was also one of the high-ranking Shinigami left behind at Siriite AI, and she was in charge of guarding the real Karakura town that was transferred to the Soul Society to avoid any accidents. The reason why Rinjaku was chosen was because she had been stationed in Karakura town before and thus, was familiar with the place. Aizen's purpose is to create the Okayan, and the creation of the Okayan would need a Jiroki, that is, the Karakura town. So, did Aizen got the final victory and is now creating the Okayan in Karakura town? Thinking of this, Nanao couldn't help but quicken her pace even more. At the place of the decisive battle between Ichigo and Aizen, Kisuke, who was looking at the sealed Aizen, waiting for the people of Soul Society to come, also sensed the changes in Karakura town. He looked at the bloodlight soaring into the sky, covering the crimson enchantment of Karakura town, and couldn't help but think of what Aizen had said before he was completely sealed. Did we fail to protect the Karakura town? Gizuki's expression became extremely ugly for a while. The last time he had such a feeling was when he learned about the captain's hollowification on the night when the soul disappearance incident occurred. Now, looking at Karakura town shrouded in an enchantment, he once again felt uncertainty. True, Aizen was sealed, and the archenemy of the Soul Society was defeated. But things changed completely beyond Gizuki's expectation. Even though he was very wise and crafty, there were always some things that he did not expect. In Karakura town, when Mizuru waved his hand, an enchantment emerged, and crimson mist enveloped the entire city. Jin, Grimjow, and Sojiro couldn't help but look around a little curiously. Although Grimjow and Sojiro had seen Mizuru use his Bankai before, even they didn't expect Mizuru's Bankai to cover the entire Karakura town without a sound. Standing beside Mizuru, they vaguely heard a roaring sound. It was like a wild beast howling. This is. When Sojiro heard the roar, he actually felt heart palpitations, which was really unbelievable to him who had lived in a place like the forest of Minnows Grand. Although Grimjow was an Espada rank rankar, he was not much better. Hearing this voice, he felt a sense of chill. Jin narrowed his eyes slightly and glanced at Mizuru. Based on his familiarity with Mizuru, Mizuru would definitely give an explanation like he always does. In your opinion, why does the Jiroki circulate in the world of living instead of being confined to one place? It was a question that caught Grimjow's and Sojiro's attention, while the clever Jin already had the answer. Because it has life. Only living things could wander around. Jin is right, the Jiroki is indeed alive, or in other words, the thing that caused Karakura town to become the Jiroki can be regarded as a living thing. Since the separation of the realms, it had been wandering around in the world of living, and it would transfer from one to another region every once in a while. The ground where it takes root in, because of the power it pours out unconsciously, the concentration of spirit particles in the air will far exceed any other area in the world of living. Although the concentration of spiritual particles at this level is still not as high as that of Hueco Mundo and Soul Society, it will still make some of the humans born in this land possess spiritual power, and the delicacy of souls with spiritual power is far beyond ordinary human soul, so such a place is often easy to attract hollow prying eyes. That basically sums up the Jiroki. Mizuru then said. But if we trace the essence of this power, it is not something like dragon veins, earth veins, or spiritual veins. These terms are actually not enough to describe it, it is actually the power of the Soul King. This name was brought up by Mizuru again. The so-called Jiroki was actually just a part of the power left by the Soul King in the world of living when the three realms were separated. This part of power had gone through countless years of changes in the world of living, and gradually gave birth to a hazy consciousness. Of course, although it does not have human-like thinking, it could still be regarded as a beast-like being. So it was not an exaggeration to say that it was alive. The creation of Okayan is to restructure his own bones with the power of the Soul King, and this restructured bone becomes the key to enter the royal palace. This is the Okayan. Chapter 312, Now, I'm sorry once the Okayan is created, because the power of the Soul King is indestructible, even if the body carrying Okayan dies, as long as the soul is not destroyed, it could be reborn again. To some extent, possessing Okayan is actually quite similar to Mizuru's ability after opening Bankai. Immortality. As long as the soul remains, it doesn't matter even if the body is destroyed countless times. In Karakura town, the wailings continued, which made people feel extremely uncomfortable. Ever since Tatsuki woke up, she was puzzled to see the city in this empty state. And now, the whole city turned crimson, and the wails started sounding throughout the city. Even though she had a strong personality, she couldn't help but feel fear at this moment. It's true that because of staying with Ichigo and others for a long time, she also awakened some spiritual power, and she was able to see some things that ordinary people could not see, and she also knew the difference between her and Ichigo and others. In essence, she was still an ordinary human student. Facing the unknown, there would still be fear in her. In particular, the wails not only rang in her ears, but also rang in the depths of her soul, which made her feel palpitations. What happened? Why did the city become like this? Tatsuki asked softly, but no one could answer her question. In the depths of the city, Mizuru made another move after explaining the origin of the Jiroki to the people around him. The red mist covering the whole city started gathering towards him as the center. As the red mist gathered, the enchantment covering the city also began to shrink sharply. During this process, the wails of the souls became more and more intense. It's a pity that no matter how loud it wailed, it still couldn't break free from the shackles in the dark. Swoon the walls of the enchantment was now only about 10 meters away from Mizuru, which was extremely narrow compared to the huge enchantment before. Mizuru reached out his hand, and in the mist, a ball of crimson light fell into his hand. Through the ball of light, one could vaguely see a snake-like substance struggling hard in it, and it gave a low-pitched sound. It's a pity that despite its continuous struggle, it still couldn't break through the crimson light ball. This is the power of the Soul King? It was the first time for Jin to see such a thing, and his eyes could not help but stare at it intensely. Mizuru didn't answer Jin's words. While holding the crimson light ball in one hand, he waved the other hand casually. Release. His Bankai was undone immediately, and Zanpakuto appeared in his hand, and then he slowly put the Zanpakuto in his hand into the scabbard. Not long after he completed this action, a Garganta quietly appeared around Mizuru and the others, and a figure with red hair came here. Beelzebub. Seeing this figure, Grimjow's expression froze. He didn't expect that the leader of the Espada would come to Soul Society. As far as he knew, Beelzebub had always been at odds with Mizuru, especially he's Aizen's die-hard loyalist. Could it be that he came here to seize the power of the Soul King from Mizuru? Just as Grimjow was racking his brain, as a result, as soon as Mizuru opened his mouth, he realized that he was simply thinking too much. You came too fucking late. Mizuru scolded Beelzebub unceremoniously. It can't be helped, because of some things I was delayed. Beelzebub explained to Mizuru. Mizuru said to Beelzebub. Szayelapro's body is over there. Beelzebub nodded, and looked at Sojiro. Sojiro immediately knew that Beelzebub needed Szayelapro's body, and so he handed Szayelapro's body to him without any extra word. Beelzebub took Szayelapro's body and released a crimson light and devoured his body. We are already behind schedule, let's not waste any more time here, and go back to Hueco Mundo. Mizuru said to Beelzebub. Beelzebub understood Mizuru's meaning, and with a wave of his palm, he opened the previously closed Garganta again, but this time the opened Garganta did not lead to the world of living, but to Hueco Mundo. Just when the Garganta was opened and Mizuru and others were about to step into it, Mizuru and Beelzebub looked at another direction. When they saw a figure was coming quickly from not far away, neither he nor Beelzebub were surprised. After seeing that figure, Mizuru couldn't help but draw a complex smile. What a coincidence. Jin also showed a hint of amusement. But in the end, Mizuru still hardened his resolve and stepped forward, and walked in the direction of Garganta. Stop. Nanao's loud voice sounded. Mizuru paused. Have you betrayed the Soul Society? Nanao had felt a familiar aura from the Crimson Barrier in Noble Street before, but she was not sure about it at that time. When she came to the Rakongai, and saw the Crimson Barrier covering Karakuro town and once again felt that aura. At that time, she immediately had a guess, but it was difficult for her to accept it. After discovering that the enchantment was shrinking towards the center, she immediately stopped hesitating, used flash steps, and rushed towards the central area. As a result, she saw Mizuru standing with Rankars and Jin. Even though Mizuru had already turned around at that time and was about to step into the Garganta, even if she only his back from the distance, she still recognized her. Nanao, I'm sorry. Mizuru responded without explaining too much. Then, without hesitation, he stepped into the Garganta. Jin didn't expect Mizuru to be so decisive, which made him a little surprised. He glanced at Renjaku who was on the ground, and followed Mizuru into the Garganta. After that, Grimjow and Sojiro followed closely behind Mizuru. Seeing Mizuru leaving like this, Nanao immediately gritted her teeth. In order to stop Mizuru, she immediately cast Hado. Hado number 31, Shakuho. A red cannon flew out of her palm, but when it got close to Mizuru, Beelzebub waved his hand, and a defensive wall appeared, easily blocking it. Mizuru and his entire party finally stepped into the Garganta. The Garganta disappeared. Looking at Mizuru's departure, Nanao felt that her heart was empty, and for a while, she couldn't bring herself to accept it. At the same time, Renjaku who was lying on the ground woke up suddenly, and exclaimed. Jin. When Renjaku noticed the surrounding environment and came back to her senses, she only saw Nanao standing next to her with a complicated expression, and the two women couldn't help but look at each other. Chapter 313, From now on, I am the king of Hueco Mundo. Hueco Mundo is a desolate area, where everything one sees is white sand. Although he just left Hueco Mundo not long ago, he couldn't help but feel a lot of feelings during this trip. When he transmigrated to this world back then, the place he landed was Hueco Mundo, and then he had to struggle in Hueco Mundo for 100 years in order to survive. It is true that he had no system, no so-called cheats, but from the fact that he could survive despite not being a Shinigami, Hollow, Quincy or Fullbringer, in Hueco Mundo for 100 years, he actually had cheats. Then he met Aizen, and his fate took its first big turning point. He followed Aizen and left Hueco Mundo, entered the Shino Academy, and became a Shinigami. Then he followed Aizen and witnessed the rise and fall of the Soul Society over the past century. And now, Aizen had lost. And here Mizuru seemed to have truly taken his own destiny in his own hands for a short time. The reason why it was short-lived, because there was still a big enemy dormant in the dark. Hueco, the last big villain in the original work. As long as he exists even for another day, Mizuru would always have to be extremely wary of him, and he couldn't even sleep or eat with peace of mind. However, even if he had to deal with Hueco eventually, that would be something for later. The most important thing at the moment was to reorganize Mundo. In this decisive battle, Soul Society suffered heavy losses, and Mundo was also not much better. When Mizuru and his party came to Las Noches, those rankars who had returned to Mundo earlier under Beelzebub's order had already been waiting for a long time. Mizuru came to the dilapidated Las Noches main hall, glanced at the scene of ruined walls, and sighed. The palace needs to be repaired. In the previous battle, the collision between Ichigo and Ulquiorra destroyed part of the Las Noches, but the main hall was destroyed. It was because of him. After sighing, he didn't wait for rankars beside him to say anything. Accompanied by Beelzebub and Jin, under the watchful eyes of many rankars present, he walked to the broken throne step by step.